The prophecies of Yeshua were the reason why Jews then wanted to distance themselves from the book after Christ. It suddenly felt more Christian than Jewish. So if someone suggests to you, well, you know what? The Jews, they used to pay heed to the Book of Enoch, but then after Yeshua came along, they wanted nothing to do with it anymore because of all those things in the book of parables, which they took to be about Yeshua. And that's kind of like, I don't know, it's quite compelling. At least you want more information about it. Wow, really? But it turns out that that's not actually the truth. The idea that the Jews rejected it after Yeshua comes from one of the early church fathers, a guy who's called Tertullian, and he was writing in around 200 AD. But what he writes is actually starkly different from what people represent him as having written. He said, but since Enoch in the same scripture, he calls Enoch scripture here, he's one of the church fathers who calls Enoch scripture, has preached likewise concerning the Lord, nothing at all must be rejected by us, which pertains to us. And we read that every scripture suitable for edification is divinely inspired. And that's a bit of a twisting of scripture, that everything that's written which is suitable for edification, the translator uses scripture here, but he's saying every writing which is suitable for edification is divinely inspired. That's not exactly what scripture says. And this is kind of one of his arguments for Enoch being scripture, but we'll get to that later. By the Jews, it may now seem to have been rejected for that very reason. So you can see where this idea comes from. But this isn't what he's saying. He says, just like all the other portions nearly which tell of Christ, nor of course is this fact wonderful that they did not receive some scriptures which spake of him, whom even in person speaking in their presence, they were not to receive. So what he's saying is the Jews never received the Book of Enoch, but the reason that they didn't receive the Book of Enoch is the same reason that they didn't receive Christ, Yeshua Messiah, when he was in the flesh. Book of Enoch is about Yeshua, so they never received it, just as they didn't receive Yeshua. You see how the argument is actually completely different that he's making, but this gets misrepresented commonly. But these things are all available to people. As far as I can remember, I've put this in the list of sources, but it's Tertullian on the apparel of women. It's something that you can find free online if it's not in the list. But I've endeavored to put everything that I've used as a source in a format that is then directly viewable by anyone watching this. So factually, I'm going to be just ridiculously generous with this, and I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. And that is to say that you could interpret his words, and his words seem pretty clear to me, but you could interpret his words to be saying what people are saying that he's saying, even though he's saying that they didn't receive the scriptures like they didn't receive Messiah. So this is as fair as I can be to this, or as generous as I can be, not even fair. This is really going out of my way to say, you know what, you don't know everything. Maybe he is saying this. Maybe you're misinterpreting his words. And maybe that's true. It certainly could be true. He was around at the time, and if he was saying that, which it seems like he's not saying very much so, but if he was saying that, then he would be perfectly positioned to know that was why they had rejected Enoch. I mean, they rejected Enoch. It wasn't in the canon. We saw in Josephus. That's my position on it. That seems to be the position of the writings of the time that we have on it. But this is me being just as generous as I can be. As an argument why we would include it in Scripture, it gets ignored because who cares what Tertullian said? Who cares what Josephus said? You know, if Tertullian thought that it was Scripture, I would want to know why he thought it was Scripture. And we'll look at that as we go on. But just the argument, the Jews stopped listening to it because it spoke of Yeshua, falls completely flat on its face as an argument why we should consider it accurate, valid, or scripture. We looked before at those statements made in the book of parables, and then we looked at the culmination of it, saying to Enoch, you're the one on whom righteousness dwells. The righteous will follow after your paths, and they will dwell with you forever. So, maybe at best I'd say, if he was saying that, he'd misunderstood what the Book of Enoch actually said. But it's not an argument to say that it's accurate or scripture or anything like that.